Hello, the Nova Scotia Child Care Association is pleased to present Pathways to Professional Recognition, a series of conversations with the Nova Scotia early childhood sector regarding professional recognition of early childhood educators. Recognition and respect, two of the recurring themes that I've heard in conversations with our members and their colleagues. The Nova Scotia Child Care Association was founded to develop the systems, skills, and attitudes for recognition of early childhood educators in Nova Scotia as professionals. So last year, we launched our professional recognition project. Christine Forsyth, who's the first speaker in the series, came to Nova Scotia in November of 2015 to conduct key informed interviews with stakeholders in our early childhood sector to get a sense of the hopes and dreams for professional recognition amongst our early childhood organizations and training institutions. She reviewed the literature on professional recognition and spoke to Professor Bill Leahy about the legal implications of professional regulation. Christine also interviewed a number of individuals in other professions in Nova Scotia and outside regarding the costs and benefits of professional recognition and the forms it took. Her findings and recommendations are contained in the Pathways to Professional Recognition. The executive summary of this paper is available for download, and it will be the basis for our conversation. When the Child Care Association started the project, we sent out a call for proposals to conduct the foundation work for the process. This process led us to Christine. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about your experience and expertise around professional recognition?
Thank you. I'd like to say, first of all, Elaine, how much I have appreciated and enjoyed and have felt very honored to be part of this important project. I think that it's exciting and development for ECEs in this province, yes. And it fits very well with a trend that is just beginning around the world to recognize the very important work of ECEs. My background, I have a varied background. I have worked in government, I've worked in business, but about 22 years ago, I became involved in professional self-regulation. And that happened when the Government of Ontario nominated me to be a member of the council or board of directors of the regulatory body for nurses in Ontario. There was a new piece of legislation, and they required someone with a background such as mine. I started out, excuse me, as research director for the Council of Ministers of Education Canada, which covers all the provinces, but most of my experience has been in Ontario. And when I was on the College of Nurses, I was part of their executive committee, of their complaints committee, of their registration committee, and so on. So I got a very firm grounding in professional self-regulation from my work there over 6 years. And as a result of that, the Ministry of Community and Social Services, another ministry in the Government of Ontario, asked me if I would chair the small team of people who was actually going to be setting up a new regulatory body for social workers and social service workers in the province of Ontario. So this particular assignment involved transitioning that profession from a voluntary college that they had set up themselves and that had been operating for a number of years to a legislated self-regulatory body. And there were many issues that arose over the course of setting that up, but at the end of the day, in 2001, their new college was set up, and they have been operating very successfully since then. They have about 12,000 members. So it was a little bit of a surprise, but not entirely, when this time the Ontario Ministry of Children and Youth Services got in touch with me and asked me if I would do the same thing for early childhood educators in Ontario. So in 2007, there was a piece of legislation that was passed that created a regulatory body, a college, that's what they're called in Ontario, for early childhood educators. So I led a little team of 9 people, including myself, that worked very, very hard over 16 months to take the recommendations that had been put forward by the sector itself and the legislation that had been created, and to develop an actual functioning college. And there was a lot of work involved in doing that. There was a bit of a time constraint because of some of the things that were happening in early childhood education in Ontario, full-day kindergarten and so on for 4- and 5-year-olds, which involved both teachers and early childhood educators. But we were able to accomplish all of that within the time frame that the government set out. And I have been appointed to that college council for the last 6 or 7 years. So from 2007 to 2017, it will be anyway, 10 years working with the regulatory body for early childhood educators. I also, during that period of time, completed a PhD in professional self-regulation at Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto. And at the same time, I have been a consultant to many other regulatory bodies in the province of Ontario. And also you presented, for example, at the National Childcare 2020 conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba in 2014 on the theme from glorified babysitter to government partner and public interest regulator, speaking about early childhood educators. So it was with this background that I came here and carried out the research that you had requested and presented you with a report and some recommendations about what professional recognition might consist of and where you might go with that.
Well, that's impressive, and I'm very pleased with our decision to have you.
Thank you.
It's been a delight to have you be working with you. What is professional recognition?
Well, Elaine, if I may, I'd like to sort of divide that up into 2 parts. One is to say, what is a professional and what's a profession? And then what is recognition in terms of professional recognition? Because it can mean many different things. And my research looked into what over the past, particularly the recent past, because the world of occupations and professions is constantly changing, but what is the current idea of what constitutes a profession and a professional? What are the key indicators, factors that you would be looking for if you were going to say this is a profession, this is, every work is occupation, but there's a certain sort of strata of conditions that have to be met in order to be considered a profession. So there are 8 that I have been able to identify and that I provided information about them in the report. Number 1, I think the key thing that to start out with is that a profession, its members have to have an organized and distinct body of theoretical and practical knowledge and the expertise that's required to do their work that distinguishes that group from any other profession or occupation. So in other words, each profession has its own, let's say, scope of practice. And in fact, in the Ontario legislation, a scope of practice is actually defined for early childhood educators. And in that province, nobody that is not a registered early childhood educator can do that work. So the scope of practice, it really says that profession alone has the necessary depth and breadth of skill and expertise and training to be able to provide the relevant services. And this is generally acknowledged, as I say, to exclude others from practicing or providing these services, as it would tend to carry very significant risk to the public if untrained persons were to do so. And it's very generally agreed that it's the responsibility of the profession itself to define that exclusive body of knowledge and to be able to identify the competencies that are needed to work within that scope of practice safely and effectively. And it is also very critical then to be recognized as a profession to identify the body of knowledge that is its exclusive domain. So that's exclusivity and scope in which it alone has the competencies required. I could give you an example for, when I think about early childhood educators, and from my experience in Ontario and speaking to early childhood educators in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, that there have been very important advances in the sciences about early life brain development. And it's a very important field of continuing study. So in other words, it's the discoveries that are being made about how a child from baby and prenatal up through the early years to 5, 6, and beyond are affecting an individual's life trajectory. It really does have, and I think at this point, it's recognized that the appropriate development of motor skills, of psychological development, of social skills, as well, the ability of the person working with small children and babies, toddlers, to be able to observe if there are any difficulties emerging, that they can then observe and report and bring in other professionals to work in a collaborative way to develop. Also, the working within a community, because I think, again, cultural and social factors are very important, and people are starting to realize that these require very specialized knowledge and skills. So this is just to say that it's very clear that if you're talking about an organized, distinct body of knowledge and skills, this in itself, early childhood education is a complex, very delicate, very creative work, which only trained and recognized ECEs can deliver safely and effectively. So I would say that is number one, to be able to identify that. So it seems to me, Elaine, that ECEs own an identifiable, recognizable, and distinct body of knowledge that is of great value to this province's social well-being and economic progress. Which leads me to the second characteristic that is recognized as being professional. And that is that the work that the professional does serves an important and valued social purpose. It's sometimes called the public interest. Just to let you know that in 2 years ago, in 2014, all the ministers of education across Canada met, and they set out and agreed upon a formal early learning and development framework for Canada, for this country. And I think it's relevant to the work that you're doing, the association is doing, and building a professional identity in Nova Scotia, is that the statement that they put out, including the Minister of Nova Scotia, unanimously acknowledge the importance of the early years, the social and economic necessity of addressing the multiple dimensions involved in early learning and care, and recognizing the unique professional contribution of those providing early childhood education services and of the field as substantive, with complex dimensions, and of high social value. So I think to address the social value, to address the distinct body of knowledge, you have already a very strong support from the ministers of education across the country for the work that you do. I would also like to point out that the third key ingredient, if you like, of what constitutes a profession is the level of cooperation that exists among the members of the profession that is achieved through the establishment and maintenance of a professional organization. In other words, there has to be a very solid commitment by each individual member of the profession to support the profession as a whole, to recognize themselves as being a member of a collective that provides these special services, a willingness to recognize and practice loyalty, if you like, to the profession and to the values that it has, and to support their colleagues, whether they know them or not, but recognize them as fellow professionals. That is really, really important in developing the standing and the status and the visibility and the recognition of the profession. not only in the outside world, but very especially amongst the members of the profession themselves. One of the problems that with early childhood educators that I've noticed is that many of them work in sites that are scattered all around the community, and they often only recognize themselves within small groups. Whereas a profession, if you think of law or nursing or social work, they really have a consciousness of all the people that are part of that profession and have developed over time a strong professional body that represents them and their professional values. So I have noticed that in Canada, and that was part of the work that I did for Nova Scotia, that there are professional associations for ECEs around the country. But when I analyzed the membership of those, it became very clear that in fact, out of the number of professionals that are registered as working in the province, the membership in the associations was very low. It was in the vicinity of 10% of the profession or less. So it says to me that there's a lot of work to be done for the professionals in this field to develop a strong coherence and self-identification as professionals. I know that that's a challenge in Nova Scotia as well. And I hope that this initiative plays an important part in raising awareness of the fact that you can start by having professional recognition, by recognizing your own professionalism, your own professional standing, but also contributing to the professional standing of your colleagues within the province and throughout Canada, really, to develop those kind of relationships. I think sometimes what makes it difficult is that there isn't always a single professional title that would be able to identify people that are professional within this field of work. You know, it's very clear when you say the word nurse, people immediately, oh yes, I mean, doesn't matter where you are in the world, as a matter of fact. In the entire, you will know what a nurse is and does, and you will recognize their value. Same thing if you said a lawyer. Oh, well then right away people have an idea, the public who maybe don't know very much have an idea. A teacher, okay, maybe they'll want to know what level do you teach, but basically they know what it is you do and what value you provide to the community. Social worker perhaps have a little bit more, you know, explanation to do, but again, people have an understanding. I think there's a lot of work to do to try to develop consistent titles across the country and also to recognize that, you know, from one province to another, just how many professionals are out there. I suspect there's 60,000 registered in Ontario. You have almost 4,000 in Nova Scotia. How many are there? So the part of recognition is just developing clarity of title, who these people are, and, you know, where they are across the country. A fourth element is for a professional is that it's very clear that they have a certain amount of independence in practicing their profession. In other words, it's not just a job that they're told this is what you have to do today, is they've got the training and the expertise and they've got the knowledge so that they can actually make decisions themselves about how they are going to practice their profession within the framework that they're working. So if they're in a particular kind of community or dealing with babies, children with particular issues or needs, they can adjust their professional training and give services according to what the situation requires. And this is true of all professions that they have. You may be working in a job and have an employer, but as a professional, you have your first accountability is to the values and standards of your profession. So that should give you autonomy, and that's what the public looks to you, is to use that independent judgment to give the best service to the clients that you're serving. Yes. The families, the children. So obviously you do need to have, you know, the kind of training and experience and judgment to be able to do that. There's a growing amount of movement towards curricula in early childhood education, but at the same time, they're very often curriculum frameworks, which again really, you know, sets out, you know, sort of broad parameters, but really requires the individual ECE to practice their independent judgment in how to actually deliver the services to the children. When we get to the fifth element, it sort of leads it out of that. It's not directly the same as, but it leads out of that, is that the members of the profession, they have collectively very significant authority and control and influence over the profession itself. And I'll talk about, the 5 things that they generally have control over. You'll hear more from Bill Leahy as well about that. But whether their authority is delegated officially through legislation by the government, or it's authority that the profession decides to impose upon itself, as the social workers did in Ontario before they got the legislation, here are the things that they cover. First of all, the profession should have, and this would be, part of being a professional, authority and control over the education and training standards of those in the professional field. It's up to the profession to say what the education is that's required in order to be a member of this profession. And there's usually, for a profession, a very formal and intense period of preparation. So a successful completion of an improved education and training program, perhaps a professional examination that's administered by the profession itself, perhaps an internship that's required, supervised by experienced professionals in the field. With the examination, Anne Mann in the nursing profession will describe the there's a national exam for nurses that every nurse must pass in order to be able to practice. As far as the law goes, as people know, there's a period for young lawyers, once they finish their education, they must article, and they must pass the articling exam before they can practice. So, and these are all imposed by the profession themselves. So the government doesn't say what should be in the articling exam or what should be in the nurses. They have to do this themselves. And so I think, given the complexity of the field and the fact that it's changing and growing so rapidly, the amount of skill and knowledge that's required, it makes sense that in order to be seen as a profession, that the profession itself has authority over that. And there have been some concerns expressed, I think, about, whether, there's adequate, consistent across the board training for ECEs before they actually enter the practice. I think those are issues that the field has to address. There's been some talk about whether a degree would be required at some point in the future. Is that in the cards? And a lot of the ECE associations across Canada are looking at this and looking at other aspects that fall within the profession's control, that you would say, well, if they have that control, they must be a profession, is that they actually license practitioners. In other words, they set up a process of registration that somebody, that sets out the criteria in order to be admitted. And obviously, educational credentials are a big part of that. Perhaps practice experience may be part of that. Also, it can include, their citizenship status in Ontario, also good character proofs, language proficiency, and so on. So it's up to the profession to set those entry requirements, and that would be a mark of a professional, too. So a third area of authority that a profession would have to have in order to be a recognized profession is its ability to require the members of the profession to engage in continuous professional learning and development. And it has to be, and you'd see this over other professions, so, and I'm sure that it's already happening in Nova Scotia to a great extent, it has to be continuous learning that is substantial. And that is verifiable by the professional authority itself and by the professional's peers. So they would consider it substantial. And that it is basically focused on maintaining their currency with developments that are happening in the professional field. And your other speakers speak to this as well. But that, across the literature and out of experience speaking with the various experts in this field, that is important. A fourth area is that the profession itself sets ethical and performance standards that are enforceable as laws by the profession itself. So this is very different from the licensing requirements in a center or in any sort of place where the services are being offered. This is the actual practice of the professional, herself or hisself. And there will be penalties for failure to meet the professional standards. And those penalties will be set out by a panel of the peers of the professional, and it could very well include the authority, and usually does, to require remedial action or to impose very enforceable sanctions, including suspending their license to practice and even revoking their right to work in the profession. So it's a very serious undertaking. The authority that the profession holds is something that it's won by having the trust of the profession and by the public that the profession can wield this authority responsibly. So all others. So I'll just move to the next criterion for being recognized as a professional. There has to be also, and you'll hear more about this from the other speakers, a significant physical or psychological or emotional or financial or legal risk to a vulnerable population, especially the members of the population who just don't have the same amount of knowledge that an ECE would have or expertise to know whether the practice was within safe boundaries. So what this would do is then to protect the public from unqualified or unsafe or unethical or incompetent people from practicing the profession. So, considering that children may be in a childcare setting of one kind or another for 12 hours out of the day, and let's say not all parents have a complete understanding of brain development and so on, nor should they. They entrust their children, their babies, their most important and precious relatives to these professionals. And there's an awareness that there's a risk involved here. And as chair of the Ontario College's complaints committee, I see the front end of complaints that come about professionals that perhaps have not been practicing in a safe or ethical way. Now, let's say out of the 60,000 ECEs in the province of Ontario, the number of actual complaints is very, very few in relation to that number. But the fact that it has happened to families, to the number of families that it has, is a matter of great concern, and that's the profession itself that is responsible for taking care of that. Now, second to last, I would say that across the board, professionals are usually members of the community who are seen with great respect, and the value of their service is acknowledged, and usually that includes fair wages for the work that they do, and good working conditions in which to do it. So I think that is somewhat changing a little bit. I think that still professionals across Canada tend to earn a good wage. That is not necessarily the case for ECEs. I do think that the more that ECEs themselves regard themselves as professionals, gather together and create a critical mass, if you like, of professionals that are visible in the community, with the stakeholders involved, like the ministers of education, publicly acknowledging their work, that situation of the wage will hopefully remediate itself over time, that will change, that ECEs will get the remuneration that they deserve for the very important work they do. Just as a side, final note about the criteria for being recognized as a profession, is some professions do also license the practice sites where the professional work is being carried out. And that, for example, can happen with healthcare professionals where services are being given in a clinic. The members of the profession themselves will go out and inspect the clinic to make sure that the people practicing there and the circumstances in the clinic meet the highest standards of the profession. So that'll be judged by their peers. It's also true in certain courts where justice is being dispensed. And it's not happening in the ECE field. As I said earlier, the sites are being inspected for their own criteria, but not the work of the ECEs in the sites.
Yeah.
So that is, I think there's a pilot project in Eastern Ontario where the professionals themselves are moving in that direction. They would like to be able to do that, to sort of assess the quality of ECE work that's being done, but that's very much in the early stages. So I'd just like to conclude, if I may, then by talking a little bit about what recognition means in terms of the professional recognition part of your question, Elaine. It's, you know, sort of what does really recognition mean? And I think, as I said earlier, for me, recognition really has to start with the professional themselves. I think when I go to graduating classes of ECEs in the community colleges in Ontario and in the university, Ryerson has a program there, and Guelph and so on, I'm just amazed at the excitement and pride that new ECEs feel in their profession. There is no doubt in their mind that they are professionals, and they are very excited, frankly, to becoming members of a regulatory body that acknowledges them. They know the government acknowledges them, and they are just bursting with pride, and they have a mission in the world that they see themselves as fulfilling, which is this, they're embodying the criteria that I've just, you know, talked about. And so I would say that recognition, professional recognition has to start with the professional themselves. They really have to, you know, look at their own practice. And I know after years of, you know, difficult work, well done, and under often very difficult circumstances, people can get sort of tired and maybe lose sight of the fact of, are they, you know, are they considered professionals? And that reflects on how they view themselves, and sometimes how they view how their colleagues are. But I think that if people are sort of thinking of themselves simply as workers who get up each day to do a job, you know, it's they've lost the magic of thinking of themselves as professionals, and it makes it that much harder to establish professional recognition in the community. Because if you don't think of yourself as a professional, how are you going to convince others to recognize you as a professional? So I say professional recognition, it starts as an inside job. It's it's something that you have to work on as a professional yourself and with your colleagues. So the second part of professional recognition is to join the professional community and support it, push it forward, really sign up to be part of what a professional recognition project might mean. It means supporting the association. It means becoming aware of the professionals, your other professionals in your own community, you know, and getting, you know, that sort of solidarity, if you like, a professional solidarity. So get a critical mass of ECEs that you know in your area, in your community, you know, and you know, convey the magic to them, you know, animate them, get them going. And then finally, I think it just becomes a natural thing that you carry that recognition of yourself and your community out into the wider community. So, you know, once you've built, you know, awareness within the sector itself, you've got the appreciation and recognition, then you can go out and start talking to the doctors, to the social workers, to the nurses, the audiologists, you know, the speech pathologists, the government policymakers, all those people out there in the community that you work with, that you collaborate with, that you partner with, to build that strong level. It's done one by one, you know, a person at a time, but that's how professional recognition comes about. And when you've done the other things, the other 8 things that I've spoken about, then you will have no difficulty in conveying that level of professional recognition.
Christine, what are your recommendations for our early childhood sector to move forward on this important journey?
Well, I set out 10 recommendations, Elaine, in the report that I delivered to your association. And they really arise from what I've just said, you know, from what constitutes professional recognition. So my number 1 recommendation to the association and to the sector in Nova Scotia is to develop a robust professional association with enough membership, like get the percentage of the membership up from 10% or so, up to something close to 50%. That will require a lot of work. But, you know, if the effort and the commitment is there, it can be done. So you need to have that critical mass of ECEs gathered together, committed to the profession and practicing in Nova Scotia. That is number one. Number two, I think while you're doing that, I think it's necessary to develop a very clear statement that describes this profession's distinct body of knowledge. So you have to write that up and find the words and the concepts that really constitute what it is that an ECE does that nobody else does or could do without an ECE's training, and that distinguishes ECEs from any other professions or occupations. That's number two. Number three, this comes out of that, will be then that you will be able to describe in clear, succinct words what is this profession's scope of practice. So what this profession is qualified to do that no other professional could do safely and competently. So in other words, you have the theoretical and practice distinct body of knowledge. Now you have created a scope of practice that describes, and that could go into legislation one day. So that is very important for you to have, but it will help you to carry your mission forward. Number four, I think it's important that you create a clear statement of standards of practice and a code of ethics. What is different from having an aspirational one, a hopeful one or a values one, is that what would be enforceable? For example, if you had someone a complaint come to you, so what is an enforceable standard or ethical behavior that would apply to all members of the profession and that would be possibly included as legislation that all members would have to meet? Fifth, I think out of that, you have to have a clear set of competencies. And these, I think, these will come into play in relation to the education, the pre-service education that an ECE would have. So a description of distinct competencies that are needed to practice the profession safely and then to meet those required standards that you have set out. Sixth, I think you need to agree on a consistent professional title so that all ECEs that fall into the description that you have of the competencies, the education requirement, what title will they have? And it allows the profession, members of the profession, and the public to identify a qualified practitioner, and so that they can have expectations about the quality of services that they would have, that of someone presenting themselves as an ECE. I've been using the word ECE, early childhood educator, because that's what we use in Ontario at the moment. But I've heard many other terms used, but it's really important that that be made clear. Another thing that, a seventh recommendation I would make is that the profession here in Nova Scotia gets serious about engaging its membership in ongoing professional learning, but of a very substantive nature. And I know you're doing a lot of work around the conferences and workshops that are being given, but I think it's about stepping up an effort to really bring the majority of the profession within a continuous professional learning program, so that there's actually something that there are, the distinct body of knowledge, competency, and scope of practice. There's continuing educational modules that they must complete in order to be able to continue to practice. And also, I think you'll hear this said by anybody, but it's important that the profession focus on demonstrating that it is committed first and foremost to the public. And that as far as the work that is done, of course it should be fulfilling to the professionals that are doing, rewarding in the sense of providing them with satisfaction in the service they're giving, but the focus is on the public. So they have to demonstrate that that's the principal interest that they have in being in the profession. I believe my recommendation is to you that you also show by your very committed efforts that you are able to partner with government to deliver that important public benefit, and that you can do that in a very ethical, responsible, and fully accountable manner. So, you know, perhaps if you're thinking of getting legislation to create a self-regulating body one day, it will be very important for those in the legislature to be able to look to your record to see that you have been able to partner and to deliver those services and to be accountable already before they give you this, this important responsibility. And then finally, I would also encourage you, and I've recommended, that you demonstrate that the profession has the ability to partner very effectively with the educational institutions around the province that are providing educational training and practice opportunities to developing and in-service ECEs to meet the profession's entry to practice and continuing professional education requirements. So partnerships, very important. Within the sector, among the various sectors, your professional colleagues, if you like, collaboration, partnership with government, and partnership with educational institutions. And I have no doubt that you can do that, because I have seen it done already with my work with you and your key informants and key stakeholders that I've had the pleasure and honor of meeting with and discussing these issues with so far in Nova Scotia. I've seen it actually come to fruition in the province of Ontario. I've been very involved in that, and I have great admiration and respect for the early childhood educators that have put all their best efforts in all the jurisdictions and have raised the recognition of early childhood educators to the point where, at least in one jurisdiction, it was beyond questioning that they were professionals and ready to take on that professional role. And I know that that's possible too in Nova Scotia, because you've got a good team working here as well. And I think that it's high time. So thank you for letting me be part and contributing to it in my way.
Well, thank you, Christine, very much. We really appreciate your counsel and your insight and your mentoring. And thank you for watching. I hope that you will all add your voice to the conversation about this amazing profession of early childhood education.